Excel. Here we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover a variety of topics for the intro. That is what Excel is, what we use it for. We're going to also then start learning to how to move around inside of Excel. The idea of this is to get you familiar with Excel so that when you're writing an assignment or doing a quiz or a midterm or an exam, for example, instead of you spending time trying to figure out how to use Excel, you can then actually be spending your time solving your questions. Well, we're going to get used to figuring out what different parts of Excel are and so on. We'll be covering the menu bar, ribbon sheet, what a sheet is, a ribbon, what a sheet is, what sheet names are. We're going to learn how to zoom in and out on Excel, as well as look up a few minor exclusive items that only Excel has that Word or PowerPoint don't actually have that will come in handy when you're using it. We're going to go over what a cell is, what ranges of cells are, how the help function works, as well as web searching, and what the formula bar is. That's part one. Part two for today is also going to be covering simple formulas, such as basic math stuff, how to do adding, subtracting, multiplication, as well as introducing you to what formulas are inside of Excel, such as sum and average. We're also going to be covering some formula errors, as well as cell formatting. Oftentimes in Excel, Excel needs to know what the information in the cell is in order to know what to do with it. We're going to be using such things as autofill, the ability to autofill in numbers to make life a little easier for everyone, as well as that applies to days and months as well as time. Then we're going to drop into charts for pie charts and bar graphs. We'll cover some basic ones on that. And then we're going to be also learning how to copy and paste from Excel into Word and PowerPoint. So to start off with, we're going to cover what Excel is. And the textbook kind of definition is that Excel is a computer spreadsheet, which is a calculation program that allows you to enter words, numbers, graphics, formulas to create tables, reports, and graphs. But what does that really mean for you as a student here at the Dhillon School? The idea of this is to make your life easier. It's to simplify calculations, use it as double checking. Some of our courses actually require you to use Excel, such as a lot of the accounting and finance classes. So the idea being that its goal and intent is to speed along the process of how you get your work done. So the first question usually is how do we access Excel? Now, given we're still in COVID-19 times, if we didn't have it, you could access the Excel application on the computers on campus. You can do that through the computer labs themselves or the computers in the library. We can do it through Citrix, which is what we were aiming on doing this evening for that, as well as if you have a Microsoft account. Usually, I would say it's a personal email account like Hotmail, Live, that kind of a thing. However, I'm going to have to check out the student side of things to find out if you guys actually have access to the licensed version of it, which would be pretty cool because recently that wasn't the case. But if you do now, that's great. Now, what we're going to cover now is the menu. The menu is defined as these labels going across the top here. That would be such things as file, insert, page layout, formulas, data. So anytime I'm referencing a word saying we're going to access the formulas menu, for example, I'll click on the formula button up here. What you're seeing change underneath here is actually called the ribbon. The ribbon sort of goes across. So this is the insert ribbon. That changes when I click on the insert menu. Clicking on the view menu, it changes the ribbon to look like the information for view, and so on. Now, say for example, you're working inside Excel and your ribbon isn't there. And you're having to keep click on the menu button, for example, and keep popping open the ribbon, but every time you click somewhere else, the ribbon disappears. We have what's called the pin. If you click on the menu and go over to the far right-hand side, you see what's called a pin, called pin the ribbon. This actually locks it in place for you. This is a handy feature to have happen when you actually have enough window space to work and you want to keep your ribbon open because you happen to be using it often. Now, inside File, if we all click on the File menu and we click on Print. Now, we're not actually going to print anything in here, but there is something exclusive to Excel that is worth talking about. So for example, when I click on Print, down here at the bottom, we have what's called scaling. Usually when you're in Word or PowerPoint, for example, and you're working on, and you want to go to print, you have the ability to print anything. You have the ability to print, but inside of here, you have the ability to scale it. For instance, you can fit your entire sheet on one page. Say, for example, you have a lot of rows and columns and so on that happen to be a little too much, and or when you're clicking, you print it the first time, for example, and you've got one column on page 2. That's kind of annoying, especially when you want to just do a simple hand in. One of the options we have under the scaling option is that we can fit it to a page, fit all the columns on one page, or fit all the rows on one page when we want to print. Recommendation for saving files is to it's recommended to save it to your P drive if you happen to be on campus, or going more into the future, saving it on your OneDrive. I'll be looking into the licensed version of Office to see if you guys actually get it. If you do, that means you're going to be getting space in OneDrive. OneDrive is like Dropbox, for example. And basically, it's a chunk of space that you'll be able to put it on. You can save it and so forth. It's like Google Drive, that kind of a thing. We are Microsoft Shop here at the University of Lethbridge, so we have most of our stuff is Microsoft based. Most of the student emails should have been moved over to Microsoft over the course of this last summer and fall. So most of the Google stuff should have gone away by now. So mostly it'll be sitting on OneDrive. Okay, the home menu. When we click on the home menu, you can see that it's very similar to Word, for those of you who have used Word typing out essays and so forth. We do, however, have a little bit extra few things in here. We happen to have a vertical alignment. For instance, in Word, when you want to go left, justify, center, or right, as well as doing indentations and so forth, we actually have verticals. So you can have the text align at the top, you can have it align at the bottom. So if I were to type in here, you can see right now it currently sits in the bottom and on the left. If I were to click on middle, for example, it will try to put it in the middle. I can put it in the top. If I wanted to center it right in the very middle of the cell, I can then choose these two options to choose from. One of the other nice features that Excel has to it is the ability to center and merge, for example. So say, for example, we wanted to highlight multiple cells and we wanted to center it across, say, 3 cells. We have a little icon here called Center and Merge. If we click on it, for example, we can then put it in the middle and it would center. This looks good for when we're going to copy and paste something from Excel and paste it into a Word document. It is often highly recommended to actually do that when you're doing presentations, submitting Word documents, essays, reports. If you're out on a co-op, for example, and your employer is asking for a report, it's always best to copy out of Excel and paste it into a Word document. We'll cover later on how to actually do that. Moving along, we have the insert menu. This is where we cover such things as the pivot table, which is in the advanced class. We'll be covering on Thursday and then a week from next Friday. This is also where we'll be inserting a bar graph as well as a pie chart we'll be doing tonight. It has a bunch of other features as well. You can import actual symbols itself, specific text, and so on. Under the page layout, this is very similar to Word in that it has margins, for example, margins, orientation, page size. One thing that's exclusive to Excel, though, is the print area. Say, for example, we have a table with hundreds of rows and hundreds of columns, and we only want to print a specific piece of it, but we don't want to copy and paste into a new sheet, and we don't want to have it mess up our formulas and so on. We have the ability to highlight an area, and we can click on print area and then set the print area. Now, as you can see from here, I've got a little bit of a border going around. If I go over to File and Print, you'll see that it's actually only showing that. The first word that I had, the TET that was in there, doesn't actually show up at all. But that's because we've only set the specific print area to be there. One of the other nifty things in here is the ability to view grid lines as well as headings.
Tony, can I just stop for a sec? That piece that you just pressed, the print area,
Yep.
do you have to do anything like take it back off so when you do print the whole thing later or something else, you're not going to be getting, okay.
Yeah, you can highlight it, then click on it again, and then click on clear print area, and the box goes away.
Thank you.
Yep, no worries. Okay. Under data, we're going to skip over formulas and come back. Formulas is what we'll spend most of the evening on. Inside the data area, this is where we're going to be doing data sorts. Sorting alphabetically, we can actually set up individual sorts. In the advanced course, we end up using text to columns and what's called removing duplicates. This saves you a lot of time when someone gives you a bunch of data, like say, for example, first name, last name, and you need to rearrange them, but you've got hundreds and hundreds of names to do that with. In the advanced class, we'll be covering on how to use these two features, on how to rearrange it and get Excel to do the work for you so that you can save a lot of time and effort and not struggle on it. As well as filters. Filters come in very handy when you're hunting for specific pieces of information. We'll cover that as well in the advanced class. Review has mostly what we usually use in here is the spell checking. Usually spell checking is turned off by default. As I mentioned before, it's highly recommended when you're working on Excel, when you've got your data, your graph, how you like it to look, copy and paste it into Word. Get Excel to do the spell checking. That's what its primary goal is. So it's always useful to use both applications if you wish. Now under view, I'm going to throw some stuff up in here just so we can use this as an example. View has a couple of options. We can make the grid lines disappear and come back. We can make the formula bar disappear, headings and so on. We can choose how we want it to look, whether we want it to be in page view or normal. Usually it's recommended to leave it on normal. One of the nice features that's in here is called freeze panes. Let's say, for example, you have a bunch of titles going across the top of your stuff and you keep scrolling down, but then you're in column G and you're like, what was the title in column G again? You have to scroll all the way back up, try to remember the name and come all the way back down. What freeze panes gives us the ability to do is when we click on it, we have the ability to freeze the top row or the first column, for example. So, or we can actually click on rows and columns at the same time. But for example, if we click on freeze top row and I scroll down, it follows along with me. So if I happen to be looking at a large amount of data, we have the ability to take a look at which data it is and easily reference the column that we're in. And that pretty much covers the basics of how to move around inside the menu and how it changes the ribbons, pinning the ribbon and highlighting a few of the features that are inside, particularly those that we'll end up using. Okay, so inside the ribbon, for example, if we go back to clicking on the home menu, we can see that in each section area here, between these vertical lines, these are each individual menu pieces. Inside of it, it's kind of a small, concise version of it. If we click on the little down arrow on the bottom right-hand corner, and we click on it, it actually will pop up an entire menu and gives us a lot more options available for us. As you can see, if I were to widen, or I'll just do this for now, but if I were to widen this, for example, some of the features start to show up, some of them get larger or smaller. And then if I shrink it right back down again, some of the menus get bigger and smaller. So sometimes clicking on these optional menus make it easier to move around in.
Office 365 Excel, I don't have those little expansion buttons.
Is that the one that's online or the one that's installed on your computer?
Oh, there we go. It's installed on my computer.
All right. Did you find them?
No, they're not.
Okay. There is another way to get to them, and we'll cover that shortly. What we're going to cover next is what a sheet is. Now, a sheet itself is this area here with all these white boxes. We have what we have going across the top are columns, and what we have going down the side are rows. If we were to click on a specific cell, one of these white boxes is a cell. Each cell is referenced first by the column header and then by the row it's in. As you can see in the top left here, it says I'm in C3. So I would go over to column C, go down to 3. If I wanted to go to, say, for example, H5, for example, I would go over to column H first and then come down to row 5, and that would be the cell that I'm in referencing. Now, the reason I mention this is that when we're doing formulas, we want to do cell referencing as much as possible. The advantage to this is that if we're working on a formula and one of our numbers has to be changed, we'd have to go back and update every other formula we're working on. If, however, we're only using cell references in our formula, and we'll cover that coming up on the basic math tab there, sheet there, when we make those changes, the formula automatically updates and the answer will update itself as well. This saves us a lot of time and effort when we're working on a variety of formulas. Down here at the bottom, we have what are called sheets. In an Excel file, the Excel file is actually called a workbook. It is a book of sheets. So what we have is we have a variety of sheets going across the bottom here. In this case, I've got sheet 1, basic math, cell manipulation, autofill, and graphs, and so on. When I want to add a sheet in, I can just click on this circle with the plus sign, click on it. It will then throw a sheet in right next to the last one I had highlighted. I have a couple of things I can do here. I can double click the name. I can change the name if I wish to. I also have the ability to move the sheet around. So what I can do is if I left click and hold, and as I drag it across, you can see the tiny black arrows. And for the 27-inch monitor, I can see that's probably going to be a little difficult to see them because they're kind of tiny. But we have the ability to move the sheet around. If we right click on the sheet, it actually pops up a menu. And we have a variety of things that we can do. We can protect it, view the code for it, rename it, delete it, insert another one, select all the sheets. In this case, since I don't need that one, I'm just going to get rid of it. Now, as you can see, I've got limited space. I've got an arrow over here on the left, gives me the ability to go left and right, searching for any sheet I'm actually looking for. Okay. We have the ability to zoom on sheets. So say, for example, I only really want to look at just this data. I don't really need to look at anything else. I can move my mouse down to the bottom right-hand corner, and I can zoom that right in. It doesn't actually mess anything up. It doesn't change the font. It doesn't change any styles or anything like that. It's just how close I'm zoomed in. I can drag the bar as well. You're clicking on it with my mouse. I also have the ability to double click the % and then choose it. So say, for example, I want to go back to where I was. I would just click on 100%, click on OK, and there I go. I'm back to the way I was originally. Comes in kind of handy when you're working on stuff, particularly if you're ever presenting, for example, onto a data projector and people are sitting at the far back of the room and they don't have the ability to see very well because the screen's kind of tiny, then you have the ability to zoom in and make it larger for them. So cells. Now, each white box, as I mentioned, is a cell. But what can I do with this cell? Aside from typing in it, changing some alignment in it, I can actually do a variety of things with it based on what my mouse is actually doing. So for example, if I actually put my mouse in the cell, it shows up as this white plus. If I were to left click and hold and drag it, I start highlighting cells. If I were to put it on an edge of a cell, for example, it changes into a tiny plus with arrows all over the place. If I left clicked and hold, I actually end up moving my cell. So say, for example, stuff's not quite lined up where I want it to be. It doesn't quite look right when I want to get ready to copy and paste it into Word, for example. I can move stuff around and rearrange it without having to retype it or copying and pasting. One of the other features that we have to do down here is the bottom right-hand corner has a little tiny green square in it. If I mouse over that, it turns into a solid black plus. I can then drag it across, and this is what we call autofill, and we'll be covering that shortly. We can do that up and down, move it around, and so on. We'll even be doing this on formulas as well. Now, when I highlight a group of cells, this is what's called a range. The reason why I use the particular term range is that when we're filling in formulas, formulas provide tooltips. Tooltips have the ability for us to sort of get Excel to tell us what it needs in order to fill out the formula. So if it says, I need you to go get a range, oh, well, I'll just go highlight this range and then I'll move on to the next piece of the formula, which we'll cover when we get into the basic math. We can highlight horizontally, we can highlight vertically. I did that backwards, horizontally, highlight vertically. We also have the ability to highlight a whole selection of cells as well. We also have what's called the help. Now the help file option that's listed in here gives you the ability for Microsoft to provide for you ways of searching for things. So it always gives suggestions such as freeze panes. We can try changing colors, for example, theme colors, fill colors, and so on. However, to be honest, YouTube is your best friend. There are thousands and thousands of formulas out there in Excel, and somebody out there has already done it. So if you need to know how to use a particular formula, feel free to look it up in YouTube. That's what it's there for. You have, my only word of warning with that is that sometimes the videos aren't of great quality. The video quality might not be good. The audio might not be good enough, or sometimes what you've typed isn't exactly what they're talking about. I've seen that more often than not. I want to learn how to use a specific formula and it's telling me something else completely different, even though that's what the video said it was supposed to do, but it didn't do it anyway. So it's best just to try and use YouTube, watch a video. You can always pause it, back it up, and so on. And lastly, we come down to the formula bar. Now, the formula bar is this area here. When I click on a specific cell, whatever I type in here shows up in the cell. The same thing works for the formulas. Now, speaking of formulas, and we're going to move on to basic math. For those of you who are following along or who can, please click on the basic math sheet, and we're going to change sheets. Now, in here, we're going to cover the basic formulas for Excel. What we're going to do first is we're going to start out with some basic math and then move on to our first sets of formulas. What we have going here is we have 4 quizzes, each with a score, 68, 78, 68, 92. What we're going to do is do some basic math. We're going to do addition. We're going to start with adding quiz 1 to quiz 2. So 68 plus 78. I've given what the formula should look like to help out. Because you'll actually own the Excel file itself, you'll be able to reference this at any time in the future to see how that goes. So anytime we want to start a formula in Excel, we start with the equal sign. Excel doesn't actually know what we're doing. We have to sort of tell it, and we do that by starting every formula we want to enter with an equal sign. So I press the equal sign on the keyboard, and then we can then type in what we like to do. Now, you can either type in C3 plus C4, or you can type in the numbers. I'm going to start with the numbers themselves to show you how cell referencing works and why it's best to do that. I add the 68 to the 78, and I end up with 146. Well, that's great, but let's say, for example, your professor comes and says, you know what, a lot of you guys, we had a bad question. Okay, I've eliminated it. Okay, that changed your percentage, and instead of 78, it goes up to 88. So I changed this, but my score down here hasn't changed. As far as it's concerned, it still seems to think it's 68. So what we want to do is actually put in the formula. So again, I make sure my cell is highlighted. And I know I'm going to be repeating myself quite a bit here, but the idea is to get the repetition going along. Follow the same repetition all the time, formulas will fill in. So I'll press equals on the keyboard. I'm going to go up and click, left click on cell C3. I'm then going to push the plus sign on the keyboard. I'm then going to click on C4. Instead of typing it, I'm going to use my mouse to do it with me. Now be forewarned, when you click on cells in a formula, if I keep clicking around to try and click somewhere else, it's going to change it. So when I get to my end of my formula, I then want to end the formula by pressing enter on the keyboard. It's not always necessary, but it's a good practice. Good practice to always end a formula by pressing enter on the keyboard. Now, as you can see, my number has updated to 166. If I were to go back and change that back to a 68, as you can see, the formula updates itself. So that's the idea of what a cell reference is. We get Excel to do all the work for us. We just simply tell it what cell to go grab a number out of, go add it to another number that's in this other cell over here, and then just add them together. And that's what we do. So next we're going to move on to subtraction. We're going to start the formula by pressing equals on the keyboard. I'm going to go up to C4. I'm going to press the minus sign on the keyboard. We're going to then go click on C5 with the mouse. And we're going to press enter on the keyboard. And there we go. The same rule applies for multiplication. Now, in multiplication, we can't actually use the letter X. The letter X is an actual letter. So Excel likes to use a symbol instead. And in this case, we're going to use the star. So what we'll do is we will start with our equal sign. We're going to go click on quiz 3. And it wants to use the star. If you have an extended keyboard, you'll find that the star is actually located just above the number pad. Or if you don't, it's actually on the number 8 key. So if you press Shift 8 on the keyboard, you'll actually get your star. And we can go click on quiz 4, press enter on the keyboard, and we move along. The same thing works for division. We can then start that with pressing equals on the keyboard. We're going to go grab quiz number 4. We're going to use the division key, which is just to the left of the shift key. Or if you have an extended keyboard, it's on the number pad. We're going to click on quiz 1 and press enter on the keyboard. And that's basic math. We start the formula off with an equal sign, we choose a cell, put in our operator, or plus, minus, whatever, choose our other cell, press enter on the keyboard. So now we're going to work on putting into our first formula. Now, formulas start the same way as the basic math does, but it has a little bit more to it. So when I start my formula, I press the equals on the keyboard, and for starters, I'm just going to put in the first letter. The first letter I put in, Excel knows that it's a formula, and it's going to try and find every formula it has that starts with the letter S. As I start continuing my formula along with the letter U, for example, it starts narrowing in. Even when I type in sum, which is basically the sum of all scores, it still has a bunch of others because there's a whole bunch in there. Now, to move on with the formula we want to use, we need to start using our round brackets. As soon as I type in my first round bracket, it changes into what's called a tooltip. The tooltip actually tells us what the first thing the formula needs us to go get. In this case, it wants the first number. Now, before I fill in my range of cells over here, what it should look like, I'm actually going to go and do this one by one, just to show you what it looks like. So I'm going to go up and click on my first cell, and then I'm going to click on the comma. And then the tooltip changes once for me to go number 2, then comma, then number 3, then number 4. And then when I finish my formula, I should end off my round brackets. When I press enter on the keyboard, it gives me my answer. Now, that's all well and good if I've only got 4 numbers to add up. But if I have hundreds and hundreds of rows, I don't want to do that by hand. So we're going to actually change it to be a range of cells, which is what we see over here. So what I'm going to do is I'll start my formula over by pressing equals on the keyboard. I'm going to go start it with a sum, S-U-M, start with a round bracket. And then in this case, I'm just going to go highlight my whole list. There we go. Got it all, one shot. Then I'm going to end it with a round bracket and then press enter on the keyboard. Now, some formulas do allow you to end the formula just by pressing enter on the keyboard, but some formulas will cause problems if they don't have more information. So it's always highly recommended to put in your round bracket. As you can see, when I click on the cell itself, even though the answer is 306, the formula bar shows me the formula that we've applied to it. So anytime we're trying to look at a number and we want to see what's going on, we'll either know if it's a straight up number, like 68 just shows us 68. There's no formula on this particular cell. If I come down to the 306, it shows my answer down here is 306, but it shows us it's actually using a formula. So why don't you guys take a moment and figure out average. I'll get you guys to click on the cell, start typing in the formula, and just take a moment there and go ahead and figure out that formula for a second, and I'll be right back. Okay. So how do we all do there? So to get the general idea of how to throw in a basic formula, easy understanding of starting to autofill in the formulas that are needed for what we do. Let's go grab those, end that off. There we go. Average 77, and so on. All right, next we're going to move on to errors. What do errors actually mean? Now, anytime you see some kind of an error message inside of Excel, the general idea of the error message is that it's just basically Excel telling you, I don't know what to do with this, or something's not right. Can you just come take a look? Is really all it's asking you to do. Yes?
Sorry, what did you get the average? Like when you highlighted all of the quizzes, and then how did you get the average? Did you click on that?
Oh, I pressed enter on the keyboard.
Okay, just highlight them all and then.
Oh, you
click
start, did
enter.
you type in your formula to make it look like this? Up in the formula?
The average, yeah, but the average.
Yep. And then you
Okay.
highlight them and then press, or end it with a round bracket and then press enter on the keyboard.
Okay.
Did that work for you?
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I don't want to make you late and everybody, so it's okay. Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, in Excel, we have a variety of error messages. Now, when you see an error message, just click on it. And Excel's just saying, hey, I don't know what to do with this. So I go up to the formula bar and I take a look. Well, it's a formula. We started it with an equal sign, and we're trying to do something with cell A3 and A4. But Excel doesn't know what to do with it. It's pretty much asking, what do you want to do? Add them together, division, multiplication, something along that line. It basically says with the null, it says, I don't know what to do. So we just go take a look. Now, referencing, when it's trying to reference something, if we take a look up on the formula bar, it says C4. So we go look at C4, it's 78, and we're trying to add it to something. When you see an error message with a reference, it basically says you were trying to do something with C4 and add it to something, and whatever that something is gone. It has no idea what to look at, no idea where to go with it, no idea what to do with it. But as I said, the idea with error messages is just pretty much to get your attention to go take a look at it and then figure out, what was I trying to do with this cell? What was it supposed to do? This particular error message here is just divide by 0. I've actually seen this in an accounting class once where they're doing a balance sheet and the balance sheet came out to 0 and they were trying to do a percentage with it and there was a division done and you can't divide by 0. So it threw an error message. Okay. Now this particular kind of error message is interesting. If we click on it and take a look up here, that's a ginormous number. Really all that's actually saying is that I can't view this number in this width of a cell. So we have the ability, when we move the mouse up in between two columns, is we have the ability to widen or narrow by using the left mouse button and dragging. We also have the ability to double click. If I were to double click it, it actually automatically widens the column to the narrowest width of whatever's in there. In this case, it's whatever that ginormous number is.
And sorry, where did you double click that again? Show me that again, please.
Right in between it's on the line that would be in between the two columns.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. If we click on the value error message here, it's using what's called a VLOOKUP formula. This is a formula we're actually going to be using in the advanced class on the accounting sheet. It's been asked by the accounting professors for us to teach you guys how to use VLOOKUP. This particular error message says, I'm trying to calculate the value. The formula looks good. I ran the numbers, but I'm not getting the right number. Well, what that means to us is we just have to go back through our formula and figure out what it is we're supposed to do in there. As I mentioned, though, we'll cover that in the advanced class on how to use the VLOOKUP formula. And lastly, we have name. We take a look up in the formula bar. It says, I don't recognize that formula name. Don't know what that is. You and I go and take a look at that and says, oh yeah, I'm missing the M on my sum. And we can just fill that in and fix it. So that pretty much covers the idea of errors. So errors are basically just to get your attention and say, hey, can you come click on this cell and try and figure out what we're trying to do with it. Okay. And that pretty much covers this sheet for basic math. We're now going to move on to cell manipulation. And we're going to take a look at the different types of cells that we can assign, different type of formats we can assign to a cell. This comes in handy when we're using formulas, as well as when we're trying to prevent error messages in our formulas. So we're going to start with the general, a general type of format. In this case, this is the address of the university, 4401. But how do I know that it's general? The easiest way to do that is to actually right-click on the cell itself and click on Format Cells. When I click on the Format Cells, it's going to pop open a menu. And then we're going to want to go click on the left tab for number. In this case, it says general. It says basically have no specific number format. Okay, in this case, it's just, 4401 University Drive. Doesn't really do anything. If I click cancel, and then I'm going to go down to number itself, I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to go to Format Cells. And in here, I'm going to click on number. Now in number, we get the ability to assign decimal places. In this case, we can choose, say, 3 decimal places, 4 decimal places, no decimal places, and so on. Currency. Under the currency format, if we right-click and go to Format Cells and click on currency, we got number of decimal places, but now we also have symbol. Let's say, for example, you're working for an international import-export company and you're dealing with multiple types of currency. As we know, the Canadian dollar, for example, is not the same value as the American dollar or as the British pound. So we have the ability to change the symbol itself. When we click on the drop-down menu here, we have such things as Bitcoin, the Russian ruble, Japanese yen, for example. We can click on that, and it will change the currency symbol for us to a different currency.
Does this have any link to like current exchange rates?
There are add-ins available for that, but not what we're covering here. I think you can actually download add-ins, for example, or there are certain applications out there that you can actually buy that will do that for you. If you right-click on date and we click on Format Cells, and we take a look at date. If you take a look, what we've got presented here in the cell says September 20th, 2019. But if we take a look up in the formula bar, it says 2019-09-20. So year, month, and day. All this is how the formatting for this is all in how we want it to look. So I can click on a different format and I can change. Okay, could change it. There we go. I can change it how I want it to look, but in the formula bar, it will always stay the same. This is done so that if we ever have to do any calculations with formulas using dates, it'll actually have the ability to do that without having to worry about it. Under date, it's just for how we view it. Under time, we click and go to format, the timing format cell. We have the ability to choose different times, different views, 24-hour versus regular hour. We also actually have a few under custom. For example, if all I want to do is just see the hours and minutes, if I scroll up here, I can just click on hours, the H focal and MM, hour and minutes, click on OK, and it just changes it to 1017. Yet the information still up in the formula bar didn't change at all because for formulas, it needs to have the whole thing. Now, percentages. If I right click and go to format cells on this, what happens here is that we have the ability to choose the number of decimal places. This is particularly important for some of the finance classes when you're calculating mortgages or you're using your financial calculator if you happen to have one. Some professors like students to use 6 decimal places, 4 decimal places, sometimes 2. If you're trying to compare doing a calculation with a financial calculator as well as doing it inside of Excel, and you end up with 2 different numbers, it's usually caused due to rounding errors. And this is usually caused when the total number of decimal places is not correctly set, so that when we're entering in the formulas into the financial calculators, it needs to line up. Otherwise, you get different roundings, then you get a multiplication, throw in a percentage in there. You have that percentage occur over a certain amount of time, and your number is just completely off. So it's important to make note of that. Excel also needs to know, particularly when we cover the finance formulas on the advanced class, on how to fill it in properly with an actual percentage sign. Lastly, we have what is called text. Here at the university, all our ID numbers start with a 00. And because of that, say for example, you're maintaining an inventory list sheet, for example, and you need to have your zeros in front because that's how it's displayed or how your boss likes it printed because that's just how they are. Then how do we type in when we type in a bunch of zeros and then some numbers and we press enter on the keyboard, but the zeros go away? Even when we look up in the formula bar, it's actually going away. So if I right click on the cell, go to format cells, and I say, I just want you to be text. Text is I don't care what you put in it, just whatever I put in it, leave it alone. So we click on OK. I'm going to throw back in some zeros, and there you go. And it literally just leaves the zeros in front. And so that pretty much covers how we manipulate the formatting for cells. Comes in handy when we want to present things as well as for formulas, calculations, dates, and so on. So what we've got here, moving on next, is autofill. Autofill is going to save you guys a lot of time, saves you typing, saves you a lot of effort, and it's got some advanced tricky parts to it as well. So for example, if I want to continue the series going down from 1 through 12, and I grab the little green box in the bottom right hand corner and I drag that down, it autofills down. But Excel only does its best to guess. When I mouse over the little menu icon down here and choose options, I can either say copy the cells, do the fill series, formatting only, fill without format. In this case, I want to choose fill series, and it continues with getting that done. Now, inside of Excel, it actually knows what Monday, Tuesday, the days of the week are. It knows what the months are and so on. So if I were to grab the bottom right-hand corner of the cell and drag it down, it will autofill days of the week, saves you having to type a bunch of times. You can also take this and go horizontally with it, for example. We can go across the top. If I started off with a month, for example, say, for example, March, I could actually do the same thing. I can drag it across. It actually knows what those are. And so on. Now we're going to look at something a little bit more tricky on the autofill. We're trying to increment our time by 15 minutes, 8, 8:15, 8:30, 8:45, and so on. If I were to come down here and drag this down, and if I let go, it only seemed to increment by the hour. But we actually want it by the minutes. And I can't seem to change the series here. So how we make that work is we can just get rid of those, and we can actually highlight 2 of them. And Excel is going to do its best guess to figure out, well, okay, let's see what you're trying to do here. And as you can see, even from the tooltip, as I drag it down, it increments it by 15 minutes. This comes in particularly handy when you're trying to set up schedules, trying to set up meeting requests and so forth inside of Excel, timing things, a variety of experiments, and so on. Now, lastly, we're going to head on to graphs. So what I've got here is I have some pre-generated graphs, and as I fill in the information in here, you'll see as the graphs actually fill in. This is called referencing. The graphs always reference a bunch of cells. And as we fill it in, you'll see how they fill in. And then we're actually going to rebuild the graphs from scratch. So you'll get to see how we get to choose a graph option, what style you want to choose, how you want to go about changing it, and so on. So the semester has ended. We got our 4 quizzes, our 2 midterms, and a final. We happen to know what they're worth as a percentage final grade, but we don't have any information here yet. We're going to throw in a formula and get Excel to do the work for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to start our formula off with the equal sign. I'm going to take my 68 score that I got, and I'm going to multiply it by the percentage grade. And I'll hit enter on the keyboard. As you can see, it only has one number to graph, so it graphed the whole thing. But I don't want to keep typing in the same formula as I work my way down. So what we're going to do is we're going to get autofill to autofill and increment the formula for us. So if I were to move the mouse to the bottom right-hand corner and I drag it down by 1, you can see that the number has changed. If I take a look up in the formula, it's actually using C4 times D4. If I click on the formula above it, you can see that the numbers have changed from C3 to C4. This comes in particularly handy when we want to do an entire bunch of formulas. As I drag it all the way down, you can see that it starts to autofill in and gives me my percentages. So we have a percentage final grades, how much the midterms were worth, which is the quizzes, and the final, which was worth 30. And it gives us our final grade of 78.3. If I scroll over here to the right, as you can see, it's got our graph built in for us. Now, these are colors, and we've got our legend, so that's great. Now, there are some things that we can actually do inside this graph. Everything in here is movable. It all just depends on where we click. Now, that being said, it's important to be careful where you click depending upon what you do, because you could mess up how you have it laid out. One of the great features about that is that you have what's called undo. Now, you can either scroll up to use undo, or you can use the keyboard shortcut called Control Z. So say, for example, I highlight this, I drag it out. I didn't want it like that. I can press Control Z, or I think it's Command Z on the Apples, and you can undo what's going on. We also have the ability to click on just about anything in here. If we wanted to change what this says, we could say final grades instead of final grade amount. We can delete stuff that's in there. If you happen to press enter, it gives you a small text box, type enter. So if we don't want to do that, we need to click somewhere else to be careful. If we want to put the legend, for example, instead of being underneath, we want to put it on the right. We can then click near or on the legend. We can then grab these little circles on the edge and sort of reshape and resize. Much like a cell, if I move my mouse to the edge, I can actually move it around. If I click near the graph itself, I can actually grab the square, I can move that over. Say, for example, I need to know what these numbers are. I can actually left click on there, right click on the graph itself. I can then add data labels, which then I can click over and say add the table labels to it. See, we got our numbers on here now. I can see that I can't really read that 24 very well. If I keep single clicking on items, it sort of narrows it down. I can then grab that, much like a cell, and just drag it out of the way. So we have the ability to manipulate our graph in multiple ways. Really, it's up to you as the student using it as to how you want your graph to look. You can choose different styles, different layouts, different kinds of things. As you can see, though, when I have the graph highlighted, my cells are certain colors. And this shows me what information I'm referencing from my graph onto the sheet. So I'm referencing these numbers to be graphed. The final grade was the title. And then I've got quiz 1 through the final happen to actually be the legend. If I come down to the bar chart, for example, I can do the same thing. I've got my grades on the left. I've got my actual marks going through for my quizzes and my midterm and my finals. I have the ability to left click on things. I can right click and I can add the data labels, for example. I can put those on to give the exact numbers. I can change the color, for example. change the fill. I can change it to, I don't know, let's go with green, for example. So the idea of being able to play around with a graph is the ability to just make it look how you want it to look when you want to present it. Now, that being said, that's nice that we've been able to play with them, but let's go ahead and make one now. So there are two ways to make a graph. The first way is to start with 0 information and create the graph first, which is what we're going to do. The second one is to actually highlight the information and then create a graph based on that information. We're going to do that too. We're going to do that as the second graph. So the first graph we're going to create is going to be a blank graph. We want to click up on the insert menu at the top. We then want to choose pie charts for this. When I click on it, I have a variety of pie charts I get to make. I got 2D pie charts, I've got 3-dimensional, I even got a donut. So let's go with the 3D pie chart. And as you can see, it's empty. So I have this blank workspace to work on. Well, in order to do that, I need to select data. So we're going to right click on it, and I'm going to select data. The reason for clicking on this particular method and doing it this way is that in operations management, when you're doing Pareto charts, you're going to be in this area adding in a variety of different information. We're only going to cover the basics here, but what it's asking us to do is it wants to know first, what is our chart data range? What numbers are we graphing? So we're going to go over here and we're going to click on this arrow, which is going to minimize our data menu to get it out of the way so we can go select what we want. What I'm going to highlight is we're going to highlight from quiz 1 to the final. It's important not to grab the last total mark, because that's all of them added together and that wouldn't make any sense on our graph. When I have that information highlighted, if you take a look in the select data source area, it's actually filled in that information for us. It says we're on the graphs sheet with the graphs, and it's got cells E3 to E9, and they're locked. The dollar signs mean locked, and we'll cover that more in the advanced class when we're going through a lot of the formulas there. But in the meantime, if we go back and click on the same arrow that we were using, you can see that it starts to autofill that in for us. And if you take a look at our chart, it's looking pretty good. It's got some information in there, but it actually doesn't know what the labels of each of those areas are. So it just assigns them 1 through 7. It picked up 7 numbers, so it threw in some 7s. As you can see for our access labels here, it only labels them 1 through 7. But we have the ability to go highlight. So we're going to then click on edit, and it says, what are the access labels? Well, if I come up here and I grab these ones, quiz 1 through final, as you can see, it autofills in the range for me, but it actually gives me a bit of a preview and shows me what each of these ones are. When I click on OK, it then has what we need for our chart. It has our graph number information as well as our access labels. I can then just go ahead and click on OK, and there we go. But the chart title is not very descriptive. If I left click on that, I can keep clicking until I get in there, and then I can just change that to whatever I want it to be. And there we go. But let's say we find out that we actually aren't supposed to be using 3D images and we're supposed to be using a donut graph. Well, that's great, but I don't want to have to redo it all. Well, it turns out we don't have to. It turns out what we can do is we can right click on the graph itself and we can change the chart type. When I click on change chart type, I still want it to be a pie graph, but in this case, let's go for a donut. I'll go click on the donut over here. Gives me a bit of a preview. I can click on OK, and it actually changes the graph for me. That's the nice feature, is that I don't actually have to redo the entire chart anymore. I can just use what's already there and change it up. And that's how you can pretty much create a graph from scratch. Now let's actually take some information ourselves and let's get graphing with it already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight from the grades under the final grade amount from quiz 1 down to final, being sure not to include that 78.3. And then I'm going to click on insert. I'm going to click on bar chart. And then I'm going to choose a bar chart. Let's go with 3-dimensional. Let's go with that, shall we? Okay, so what we have going on here is it's auto-filled information for me. Still doesn't quite know what my labels are, but that's okay. And my chart title, we can change that right away. That's pretty easy. We'll just get that done right quick. And let's see, if we come down here and we left click on our legend, and then so it's highlighted, and we right click on it, then we can actually choose, let's see, select data. We'll throw open the menu again like so. We can click on edit. We're going to go grab our list again. You can see it gives us get a bit of a preview. We can click on OK, click on OK again, and there we go. We widen it out a bit. We can make it a little bit better, and there we go. So we've created some basic charts. We know we have the ability, we can mess around in them. We can change different styles, layouts, how it looks, what it does, things like that, and so on. But as I mentioned at the beginning, it is best if we copy this information out of Excel and put it into Word. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to open up Word on here. And I'm going to get PowerPoint at the same time because I'm going to need to use that one too. And over here. Open up a blank document. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab the pie chart first. Get this guy out of the way. There we go. I'm going to right click on the chart itself, and I'm going to click on copy. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to Word. So I'm going to stop sharing in this case. You guys can just switch over to Word as well. And we're going to, there we go. Now then, let's make this look like a normal document. There we go. Okay, so I'm in Word. And I got some text, and I've got some paragraphs of stuff. And I want to put this chart someplace specific. Like I want it to be mixed with a paragraph, or I want it to be in a very specific spot. Now, there's a feature called Show Hide inside of Microsoft Word. It's actually the paragraph symbol from a long time back when everything used to be handwritten. When I click on that, it actually puts paragraph symbols. In this case, you can show where each paragraph ends. If I were to put the mouse cursor in a specific spot and I hit the tab key, for example, it shows me tab indicators. If I were to put in spaces, it puts in space indicators. So I can know the exact spacing and location of anything I use here. If I were to click on the show hide again, I can make it disappear so it looks like normal. But when I want to try and line things up, I got a specific place in mind I actually want to put it. Now in this case, I want to put it right there, between those two tabs in the middle of this line. I can then right click, and I have a bunch of paste options available for me. I can say I can use the destination theme and embed the workbook. I have the ability to keep the source formatting and embed the workbook, which basically means embedding a workbook means taking the entire Excel file and putting it into Word. If your Excel file is many, many megabytes, that's really, really large, then that could actually make your Word document really large. You also have the ability to use the destination theme and just link the data. Linking the data between Word and Excel means that you can't move those two files away from each other. They always need to know where each other are so it can reference the Excel document when you open up the Word document. And the other option you have is to put in a picture. Now, putting in a picture basically is straight up picture. I can't do anything with it. I can move it around. I can resize it. I can, spin it around if I wanted to. I can do a variety of things, but I can't really do anything else with it. If I want to make any changes to the graph, I'm going to have to go back into Excel, make those changes, then come back. But let's say, for example, I were to choose to just embed the theme. By doing that, it actually kind of treats it just as if it was inside of Excel. Like say, for example, you're doing a presentation, your boss says you only have 8 minutes to present to me. If you can't get the point across in that time, you're not getting what I want. So, and as you're flipping through your slides and your document, you're going as quick as you can, and you want to highlight a particular piece, you could actually keep clicking on an item here until it's highlighted by itself, and then I could just drag it out, for example. Basically what this means is that yes, you can see the quizzes and you can see the 2 midterms, but I want you to see or highlight specifically that that particular piece of information. So we have the ability to do that. One of the other options we have here when I've got the chart highlighted is this icon here called layout options. If I was to click on the layout options, it gives me the ability on how I want this graph to interact with text. Like if I want it to be square, like I want the text to go through it or right around it. I want it to be super tight. If I want it to go through, for example, basically what this does is this creates an anchor saying your picture is anchored here, but you can move it around now. So you can it will do its best to try and figure out what you want to do based on how you move your graph around inside of a Word document. All right, moving on to PowerPoint, we're going to go back to Excel and we're going to grab the bar graph this time. So I'm going to left click the graph first to make sure it's highlighted. And then I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to click on copy. Now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go over to PowerPoint. I'm going to click on that one. I'm going to add in a new slide. And I'm going to choose, say, the to content slide. And I'm doing this for a specific reason so that you can see we can stick the graph wherever it is we want to. In this case, I'm going to put it over here on the right-hand side. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to embed the workbook like I did before, and it auto-fills. Now, the nice thing about this is that you can actually resize this in here too. Have the ability to move this around. You can click on certain areas. You can make things a little bit bigger or smaller depending on how you do it. You can line things up, make the title much larger, that kind of a thing. And inside of it, you can do that as well. Say, for instance, we don't want blue. Let's say we want to go strictly to a gray type color. Let's say we want to change the fill. Let's say we want something a little bit more gradient, give it a bit sort of use a theme on it, for example, that kind of a thing. And that pretty much covers how to copy and paste out of Excel into Word and PowerPoint. The major advantage to that is that you don't have to submit more than one file. If you're doing your presentation, you can really spruce up the presentation itself, as well as giving you the ability to still manipulate some of the data if you wish. And that pretty much covers the introduction to Excel. And so what we've covered is we've covered how to move around inside of Excel. I'm going to switch back over to that. And so we've covered the menu system. We've covered what the ribbon is, how to move around inside of it by clicking on various areas. We've covered what a sheet is in general, columns, rows, what the formula bar is, and so on. We've covered basic math information, adding, subtracting. We've entered in our very first formulas, sort of give a general over idea that error messages are just basically to draw your attention to that particular cell because Excel doesn't know what to do with it. Cell manipulation is important when we're dealing with specific types of currency, date times, percentages, and so on. Autofill helps you save time, figuring out that kind of thing. And then onto graphs for being able to graph information, having the ability to then copy and paste it out of Excel and into Word or PowerPoint. So that in total is sort of the entire course there for the intro.